Seeing some thumbs up, doing great. That's awesome. All right. Some smiley faces. Fantastic. Enjoying that. Well, definitely um, thank you. We have our next panel that will be talking with us today. And these are representatives from the National Council on Family Relations. So Chad, I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Judith. Yeah, we're all members of NCFR, which, as Judith said, is the National Council on Family Relations. And thanks everybody for joining our session today titled Faculty as First Responders. We're really glad that you're able to join us. And so we'll get started with some brief introductions from each of the presenters.
Hi, everyone. I am Deb Berkey. I am the Director of Psychology Programs in the Center for Prevention Science at Wilmington University.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Dorothy Berglund, and I am the Chair of Psychology and Family Science at Mississippi University for Women in Columbus, Mississippi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Obasi. I'm an Associate Professor in Family Science, and I'm also the Director of Research Integrity at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. Lovely to be here.
And I'm Chad Nuttemaker. I'm an adjunct faculty member at Wright State University and an adjunct instructor at the University of Cincinnati. So first, let's take a look at our community agreement for today's session. So please make sure you keep your microphones unmuted. We're in a webinar format, so I don't think that's much of an issue. Same thing with the webcams. But please be sure to use any indicators that you would like to speak. So you should have an option to raise your hand through Zoom. I'll be keeping an eye on that. You can also signal in chat if you'd like to say something that is more detailed perhaps, or that there's more coming. You could signal about that as well. And like I said, I'll do my best to keep tabs on that as we move through the session. So please feel free to use the chat. There is also a Q&A section option, I believe, that is active right now as well. Either way is fine, and I'll be monitoring that throughout the entire presentation, and I'll be able to read out your comments and your questions and things like that to the presenters as we're moving through today. And then also you can choose to send a private message, which is just able to be seen by the panelists. And if you would like to indicate in your message that when it's read aloud, you would like it to be read anonymously, we can certainly do that as well. And then finally, our last goal here is that we're all here to connect and learn and have fun. And hopefully we can all learn something today about faculty as first responders. So let's get started here. So recently a faculty member made the following post to Facebook. This faculty member says, is anyone else having creative or class preparation burnout? I'm usually a very creative professor, and I usually love creating highly interactive experiential classes that generate classroom community. I enjoy crafting lectures and especially the visual portions of it. And when I was face-to-face, I was known to teach with live cartoon-style graphics on the whiteboard and tons of colors. I'm a highly visual person and do visual arts as a hobby, so I really enjoy teaching in a multimedia fashion. I feel like my brain is broken right now. Of my last 12 classes in the last 3 semesters, including this one, I've had to create a ton of online materials and activities for 7 of them. The other 5 were one repeating intro class that I had thankfully taught online in the past. At this point, I feel like I'm going to run away and hide from every week, which is super not like me. I'm tired of generating creative and critical thinking questions that work in online mastery quiz environments. Tired of thinking of activities that work on Zoom. tired of generating lecture content. Is anyone else feeling this and have come up with solutions or tips and tricks to help you get joy out of it again? I'm doing the whole, you get a reward of paper crafting, riding your horse, eating chocolate once you finish this week's lectures or get through 5 hours of Zoom or build those 2 quizzes. But I really wish I felt joy again instead of dread. I've never felt like this week after week about my job. I love my job. I know I do. And I know I'm doing a good job. Students are telling me this. I feel creative in other ways, like my personal art, but I feel exhausted and like I have run out of joy and creative spark in teaching. So that brings us to our initial poll here, which I should be able to activate. Or maybe Judith, you need to. Ah, there we go. I think I can launch it. Oh, hang on. Alrighty, can everybody see that poll? There we go. Now, there we go. Sorry about that, Judith. But we've got 3 questions for you here. Can you relate to this person's post? Do you have colleagues who can relate to this person's post? And do you have students who can relate to this person's post? So you've got 3 options for each one. Yes, no, and maybe. And I'll give you just a few moments to respond to these poll questions. So can you relate to this person's post? Do you have colleagues who can relate to this person's post? And do you have students who can relate to this person's post? The answers are still coming in. All righty. All right, and I believe that I can share the results here. There we go. So you can see here, we've got an overwhelming number of yes and a good number of maybe for each. There were a couple no's in relating to the post, and then one no for if you have students that can relate to this post. So I think, generally the shared experience that a lot of faculty have gone over since the onset of the pandemic has been this type of an experience. In that post, I really could feel that faculty members' frustrations and their experience of stress and trying to figure out, what are the ways that I can work through these issues and these challenges that are positive and that can help me. Basically, it sounded like they were saying can help me be able to renew the love that I have for this work that I do every day. All right, and I'll toss it over to Deb.
Thank you, Chad.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can get this screen advance. Perfect. Yay. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to be talking about trauma and toxic stress in higher education. And I think I've been in higher ed now for 32 years. And I will have to say these last 2 have been unlike any of the other 30 I've been in higher ed. I'm pretty sure we can all say trauma and toxic stress has been experienced by everyone, globally even, this past 2 years, including faculty, staff, and students. So we actually saw that in your poll as you were relating, for the majority of you were relating to that person's post. The other thing that's really important to think about as we deal with or talk about trauma and toxic stress is we bring who we are with us. Sometimes people call that our invisible backpack. And all our experiences that we've had throughout life come with us. And they impact how we define and how we experience trauma and toxic stress. So I'm going to be talking about trauma and toxic stress and the impacts kind of in a generic framework, but knowing that your experiences definitely can enhance or exacerbate or damp down your experiences of trauma and toxic stress. So what I'm saying may or may not relate to you, again, because of what you bring from your history and your background. I'm going to take a little temperature as well and find out your knowledge about trauma and toxic stress in educational settings, ACEs, and the 3 rounds of ACEs. So, Chad, do I need to give you control back to launch the poll, or can I launch the
No,
poll?
I'll just let Judith do it this time.
All right.
Because I made a mistake last time.
That's okay.
All right, thanks, Judith.
So again, you have a poll with 3 questions. The 3 questions have the possible responses of yes, no, or maybe. And the first question, I am familiar with the research on trauma and toxic stress in educational settings. Second is I've heard of ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. And third is I've heard of the 3 rounds of ACEs. All right, Judith, I think we might close out the poll in another sec. Whenever you're ready to close it out. All right, so you can see the results on the screen here. A little over half of you have some familiarity with research on trauma and toxic stress in educational settings. And I didn't specify whether that setting was higher ed, K-12, P-20. Doesn't, in some ways it matters, in many ways it doesn't. The things are transferable. There's transferable knowledge and skills amongst the P-20 areas. Many of you, fantastic, have heard of adverse childhood experiences. And then some of you have heard of the 3 rounds of ACEs, but some of you have not. And so I will spend a little bit more time focusing on the bigger, broader 3 rounds than I will on adverse childhood experiences solo. So I'm going to stop sharing that. And move to there's a little time delay in the slides coming up, so I want to apologize. So I thought it might be useful if we did some level setting and we talked about some definitions. So one definition that was developed by Rice and Groves in 2005 said trauma is an exceptional experience in which powerful and dangerous events overwhelm a person's ability to cope. And it's certainly true. I mean, there are many exceptional experiences out there. One of the most recent ones that we've all honored was 9/11. And that certainly was a powerful event that could overwhelm somebody's ability to cope. However, other definitions have been a little more broad, a little more diverse in their ways that they're looking at trauma. So this definition by Massachusetts Advocates for Children talks about how it's not necessarily the event, but it's how we respond to that event. So it could be any event that happens. It doesn't have to be that powerful or dangerous one that the previous definition said. It could be something like almost getting in a car accident. It could be something like failing a test. It could be something like losing your keys. That it's how we respond to that stress. And if our ability to cope is undermined. So in general, when I do programming, I tend to go with this definition because again, it's what we bring to the table, it's our interpretations, and it's not necessarily the fact that it has to be this huge, tremendous event. It can be many different kinds of events that occur that could be traumatic. Now, toxic stress occurs when we experience things, events over long periods of time. So in the first two definitions of trauma, those tended to be sort of concrete, well-defined, blocked out things that happen. But there's also, there are also incidents that occur over a longer period of time. For example, the pandemic, which we've been experiencing and continue to experience. So we're all experiencing this adversity over a long period of time. It can turn toxic, again, if we don't have adequate support. And I just want to do a shout out to the Center on the Developing Child. That's an amazing resource if you're not aware of that. I encourage you to look it up. So the three realms of ACEs. This is kind of where the gold standard is right now in talking about trauma and toxic stress. Started out with the research done by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC, where they identified adverse childhood experiences, which are represented by the tree here on the left-hand side of your graphic. Number two, which is community, which is where the tree is situated. Work was done by George Washington University. And then the most recent addition to the graphic is the environment, number three, which is done by PACES Connection, which is an online collaborative resource, another really good resource that I encourage you to search out. So we've zeroed in, things should be more clear. Things should be a little easier for you to read right now. And you'll see, again, the household, the things that happen internally, which is what the ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, looked at, things like neglect and abuse and parental incarceration, divorce, things that happen in our immediate household. Well, what George Washington University realized was, the households live in communities. We live in towns, we live in developments, we live in neighborhoods, we live in states, and things like schools, our schools and our jobs and our housing and all play a role too in, we all might experience, adversity at that level. We may not experience it at the household level, but we may at the community level. And then again, PACES added the concept of the environment, which is really timely right now, considering pandemic is part of our environment, natural disasters, hurricanes and tornadoes. I know one of the recent hurricanes that occurred dumped a lot of rain on areas that I live in Delaware, and families that were in more low-lying areas experienced flooding and had to leave their home and seek out other resources. And so it's, again, the concept of acknowledging that we need to think about trauma and adversity and toxic stress kind of in a holistic or ecological perspective, but also B, we may experience it at some levels, but not at others. So I may experience my environment, but my community and my household may be perfectly fine. I think we can safely say everybody's experienced a pandemic. So we've all experienced an environmental adversity, but how we've experienced it within our communities and within our households may be very different based on those resources that we have, based on our experiences that we've brought to the table, and based on our interpretation of the event. So what does that mean for us who experiences trauma? As individuals, we may have firsthand experiences with trauma. We may have grown up in families where there was, abuse, neglect, divorce, parental incarceration. We may bring that to the table. But as first responders, as faculty, we may also experience stress related to helping others, including our students who may be experiencing trauma. I know there's one story of a student that still stays with me who was doing his senior internship at boys in not incarceration facility, but something similar. And he was really enjoying it. He really liked it. But when he went, he was let go. And he was let go for not wearing the correct clothing and not acting in what they considered appropriate ways. And it turned out he was wearing clothing that was that he had worn, his khakis and a polo that he had worn in his position as an admissions counselor for a university, but it wasn't their uniform. It wasn't their standard. And as it turned out, he was homeless. He was living out of his car, and what he had was his khakis and his polo. He did not have money to buy the clothing that they would like. That story has still stayed with me. And that's probably at least 5 years old, if not closer to 10 now. So what I think about is I'm helping and working with students who might have trauma. Sometimes if there's too much trauma, if there are too many things going on, we as faculty, as individuals might feel compassion fatigue. We may feel symptoms of burnout. We may feel like there's nothing we can do to help. There's too much going on. It's totally overwhelming and we need to step out. And then also, one of the key things for us too is to know what our own personal triggers are, to know what triggers us, whether it's a sight, a smell, a sound, a motion, a situation, a story. That might trigger us, even though it has nothing to do with where we currently are, or it's not relevant, but it can impact how we interact with students and how we interact with our faculty and our colleagues. So typically, you probably wouldn't be surprised by these statistics. No, if you know the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, you know a number of people have experienced adversity during their childhood. So it's not surprising that over 2/3 of our students have reported traumatic exposure. And many of our students have reported multiple exposures. And again, remember, these students bring these with them to college. They bring their histories with them into the classroom. So it could be trauma that they experienced in their home, in their school, with learning, in their communities, and they're bringing that with them into the college setting. In addition, a number of students experience trauma while they're at college. And this particular study by Gallitzer, Levy, and others said as many as 50% of college students have been exposed to a potentially traumatizing events in their very first year of college, much less other years. So knowing that we are working with a population that has experienced a lot of trauma. There aren't a lot of studies on faculty and incidents of trauma exposure, or how much of trauma that we've experienced necessarily, but we do know that we are in the helping professions by working with students and by caring and by wanting to see them learn and grow. And it's not uncommon for those of us to develop vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue or have high rates of traumatic symptoms. And so one of the things, a significant focus of the session is going to be on how can we as faculty, how can we as first responders address this? How can we take care of ourselves? Now, if you're familiar with adverse childhood experiences, it's likely that you've heard or seen the TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, where she talks about a bear in the woods story and the stress response. And when we see that bear in the woods, our tendency might be to fight it, to flee, or to freeze. And I understand there's different methods to use depending on the color of the bear. I can't tell you what they are, but there are different methods. But when we see a bear, our amygdala sounds that alarm. We trigger whichever of these responses would be appropriate. Hopefully we remember which one. We get adrenaline released and cortisol, and our immune system gets activated. And as you know, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris says, it's great if you see the bear in the woods and that survival instinct kicks in and it can save your life. But when it's out of balance or when you're living with the bear, that can shorten your life. When this stress response that we experience is activated too many times or for too prolonged a time, our body cannot shut off the thermostat, and we're always like overheating, so to speak. And that has definite implications for growth and development. If we have this dysregulated stress response that continually blasts all these hormones through our system, particularly cortisol, it impacts how our brain is growing, our brain functions, it impacts our immune system, it impacts our hormones. And so that again has significant impact on how we're able to function in life, how we're able to learn, how we're able to participate in, just everyday being. Again, when we experience these continuous stress or threats or trauma, we get put in this chronic state of fear. We get put in that chronic state of overheating. Our survival brain kicks in overdrive. And what do we have to do to survive? It doesn't matter. Even if it's not a survival setting, because we're in this continuous overdrive, we're always thinking survival, survival, survival. And that can create this overactive alarm system. And if we have an overactive alarm system, it's like the boy who cried wolf. When it happens so many times, sometimes A, we might get desensitized, or B, we're constantly being triggered. And sometimes we get triggered even when there's no actual threat, because again, we hear a sound, a smell, a sight, a story, and it might trigger this survival response even when there's not an actual threat. We don't have control over that. It's wired into us. We're predisposed to, want to survive and to have this drive to survive. And how it happens physiologically, we may not be able to control initially. But we can control it by how we perceive things. And again, we're going to come to that in a minute. There are lots of things that might trigger somebody. I mentioned sights, sounds, smells, situations, stories, also things like unpredictability. And we know there's been a heck of a lot of unpredictability in these last 19 months, 20 months with COVID. We know we've had lots of changes in our routine. I'm finally back operating out of my office one day a week after being gone for 15 months. And it's different to be back in my office now because my routine is working out of my house. Sensory overload, feeling vulnerable, being frustrated. And I know there's been a lot of frustration around social injustice, racial unrest, around the pandemic, around things not happening in a timely fashion or what we feel is a timely fashion. And then confrontation, that can also be a trigger. This is another picture that demonstrates responses to stress. And again, it's not that stress is necessarily good or bad. We're alive and we experience stress. That's a normal part of life. But how we respond to it is what makes it positive, tolerable, or toxic. So positive, when we have a positive response to stress, it's a brief response. We just get this quick elevation and then our body returns back to normal. Tolerable is if we get elevated and we're elevated for a little bit longer, but we've got resources, we've got supportive relationships, we've got a friend that we can talk to, we've got money that we can buy something that we might need that might help us, resolve stress. It becomes toxic when we've got this prolonged activation again. And we don't have those protective factors or protective relationships to help buffer us from the impact of stress. So again, how we respond is what's key. How our body responds, how our mind responds, how we interpret things is key. So just a couple of the effects on the brain, and I'm going to call your attention to the smaller bullets. there's the enlargement of the amygdala. But what that really does for us is we have difficulty maintaining attention. The locus coeruleus releases noradrenaline that increases our anxiety, our arousal, and our aggression. Our frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex gets downregulated. So we have challenges with reasoning, with making decisions, with concentrating. And then we have a change in our hippocampus, which impacts how we can create long and short-term memories. You think about all of those and think about how those might play out in a learning environment. Trying to learn when you can't make decisions, trying to learn when you can't concentrate, trying to learn when you struggle with reasoning. You can see how those can all impact how we learn. It also impacts us socially, where we might have difficulty trusting and difficulty asking for help. And again, in that learning environment, if we can't ask people for help, or if we don't trust others, that's going to impact our ability to learn. Oops, I'm a little too fast there. Oh, well. Sorry, I skipped a slide, but the slide you'll get a copy of these slides, and the slide basically says adversity has long-term impacts on us physically, mentally, cognitively, socially, emotionally, and so on. Oh, are we going back? Oh, there we go. Thank you. So yes, basically, this slide indicates any adversity can have impact on our health, on our behaviors, on our potential for life, which includes graduation rates, academic achievement, lost time from work. And the research shows typically the more adversity we experience, the higher that impact is. So the concept of fight, flight, or freeze, what's that look like in the educational setting? If we have fight, as you might imagine, it includes behaviors like acting out and behaving aggressively, but it can also include acting silly or as a different way of diffusing anger and frustration and confrontation. Flight might be skipping things, not being there, or it might be physically there, but disengaged and not cognitively and mentally there. And then freezing can be giving you that blank look, not being able to attend, not being able to answer, sitting there and being numb. So there are lots of different ways in an educational setting that we might see our fight, flight, or freeze phenomena. And I want to, if you wouldn't take a moment, please take a moment. And in the chat, think about what are some examples of fight, flight, or freeze that you've seen in colleagues or students? And as you're thinking of those, just as a reminder, excellent, being non-responsive, not turning in assignments, phenomenal. Blank stares. We know trauma is real. We know trauma is prevalent. We know trauma can be toxic to the brain, can impact us in multiple ways. But we also know as humans, we're resilient and we can grow, learn, and succeed. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Dorothy to talk about growing, learning, and succeeding.
Hey, everybody. And we are going to start out with something in the chat. Do I have control yet?
Yeah, you should. If not, you can request again.
Yeah, I'm going to, because I don't.
Okay. There you go.
and there is a lag, I noticed that too. List a few, we're going to start with thinking about this because we're going to turn around and start looking more specifically at work and some work-related challenges you've faced since the onset of the pandemic. And so while you're thinking about that and responding to this next thing in the chat, I'm going to start out by saying, that what we're going to consider is a family systems approach, but something that also can be applied as well to our own individual systems, the systems we work in, and so on. And it has a lot to do with what Deb was saying. Like, you're going to see a lot of overlap between the 3 realms of ACEs and the contextual model of family stress, which is the version of family systems theory that I'll be talking about. Also things I loved, that definition of trauma. It's not the event, it's your response, because it has everything to do with how you perceive what is going on. So that is something else that's very, very important here, because a lot of times our perception and the way we see things is what undoes us. It is not the event itself necessarily, but it's like thinking, if you go in thinking everything is horrible. Oh, exactly. Splitting time between home and college and remembering which to take, which are at home, social distancing, lack of face-to-face communication, excellent ones. I've experienced that. Yeah, that's another one. Anything else? These are all good ones. Yeah, work-family boundaries when work was remote. Yep, experienced that one. Myself, yeah, positivity to support students and faculty. That's very hard to do as well, especially if you're in a position like a chair or a director where that is what you're supposed to be doing. Oh yeah, when technology is down and everyone's expected to be doing their work. And sometimes you don't know it's down because it's down, which I'm not trying to be funny, but we just had that same hurricane that Deb referenced. It hit pretty bad here where I live, and power was out all over the place. Finding replacements for students and field hours, yeah, that's another one we've experienced. In our field in family science, we have to put our students in internships, especially for accredited or approved programs, and it's hard to do that. Yeah, addressing concerns about COVID. Oh yes, especially for parents. We're going to talk about that too, who experienced the most disadvantage from this, the whole experience. Maintaining balance and when to stop working. Yeah, that's a very, all of these things are really, really things that we've all experienced, I think, over the past year. I've seen, or past 19 months rather, I've seen a lot in here, especially about maintaining a sense of balance and, and setting those boundaries. And that is really important. We are going to address some of that and knowing when to stop working. And the way, like I said, I'm going to approach this. Some of this does relate to a lot of what Deb was talking about, although it's in a slightly different way that we're talking about. Because I'm taking more of a family systems approach to this, rather than, looking at the 3 realms of ACEs, for example. And we're going to talk about ambiguous loss and boundary ambiguity. And again, this is part of the contextual model of family stress, which is an offshoot of family systems theory. And these are ways of looking at loss. And even though this is looking at personal loss, like losing a family member, they're either physically present, but psychologically absent, like somebody who overworks, somebody who's substance abusing, and so on, or the other way, they're physically absent, like they passed away, they're missing in action, but they're, very much on your mind. I think we can apply these concepts to what we've experienced over the past 19 months. And even if you're fortunate enough to emerge from childhood without having experienced in ACE, and as we've seen, that is very unlikely. We have all experienced some very important things over the past several months. And the first of these is ambiguous loss. That is a very important stressor. It's an unresolved loss. What this basically boils down to in the context of what we've been through with this pandemic is simply the fact that we don't know when it's going to end. Things change every day. You hear some advice from the CDC one day, it says, don't wear a mask if you're fully vaxxed. Then the next day they come out and say, wear a mask if you're fully vaxxed. Then they say, oh, and I was so excited this summer when I got my vaccines and I went to a conference and we were all distanced, but because, you know, they tried to make sure to vet us ahead of time, make sure we were vaccinated. We were in a room where no masks were worn. We were distanced. I was so happy. Then the Delta variant comes along and then that's blown. It did the same thing to our fall plans on our college. You know, so we've had a lot of ups and downs and uncertainty with this. Boundary ambiguity is perception of unclear system boundaries. That's how we see this whole situation. And sometimes people tend to resolve this in ways that may or may not be helpful, either denying the whole thing is happening, you know, which is a very hard thing to do because it's being thrown in your face all the time. Every time I walk out my door of my office, I have to put this on. You know, or, you know, you tend to pretend like it's not happening, you know, or something like that. So it's kind of the way you see this situation. You're in denial about it. You think, oh, it's all over. Everything's back to normal. I'm fully vaccinated. I can go traipsing along in my life like normal. But, you know, maybe we can't. The other thing to keep in mind about this particular model is that we also have resources that come to bear on our situation, things, our toolkit, which is what we're talking about today, that we can use both individually and outside of ourselves. And if our resources aren't adequate, or if we have a very negative view of what's happening to us, you know, we can enter what's called crisis. And that's basically people, especially my students, they think crisis is bad. And as we'll see in a minute, crisis isn't necessarily bad. It just means change is needed. And it means the system is moving towards that change. And it can be for good, you know, or bad, depending on how you see the situation. And, you know, again, let's see what else I can say about this. You know, like I said, you know, we're trying to look at our toolkit. And the thing that's important too to remember about this model is this part about perception. Because boundary ambiguity, again, is how we see it. That is the part that is most amenable to change. And we're going to start with ourselves, because we can change our perception. We cannot get rid of the pandemic. I wish to goodness that we could, but we can't get rid of this. There's other things in our lives we can't change. We can't change if we had experienced ACEs. We can't change that. What we have to do is think about the situation in a different way and do some different things in response to what's going on. And this brings to mind, what on earth is resiliency? And some people see resiliency as basically you just come out the other end and you're fine, or you look happy, joy all the time, but you're ignoring what's going on. I like to use the word optimism versus hope. And if you hear the word optimism, a lot of people think, oh, that's a good thing, right? You know, if you're optimistic, you see the sunny side of life. Well, what optimism really means is that's all you see. Hope means you see the good, you see the bad, and you figure out a way through. And that is resilience. And it's being able to bounce back and grow from trauma and crisis. So, you know, think about this. Think about adjusting to this ambiguity. It's very hard for us to do that. And we'll talk about why in a minute. In our current context, what this means is adjusting to the ambiguity. This is the idea, resilience is the idea that you're living with something. You learn to coexist with it. You're not skipping over it. You're not, you know, ignoring it, but you're becoming comfortable with it. We're not getting rid of this. We actually need to develop a tolerance for ambiguity in this particular case. We're living well without certainty. And of course, this idea also, you know, deals with ambiguity and resilience at the individual level, which is where you need to start. But also, what about at a systemic level? Because we are part of a broader social system. Well, the thing that's very interesting to me, and research backs this up, for a system to change, one person in that system has to begin to change. And again, we can't change how other people respond. We can't change the pandemic. That's with us. We can't change, how our higher board of education or our university is responding to this. But we do have to change our perception. Is how do we change if the surrounding environment is constantly in flux, if it's a moving target? Well, the best thing is to start here. And then the weird thing is research, and again, research backs me up on this, other things start to change. And even Pauline Boss, whose research I'm talking about, and whose theoretical approach I'm talking about, says start within and move without. Because if we are helpers, we cannot help others until we start making these changes in ourselves. We can't do that. And it's also something that helps us get at that compassion fatigue and other things that are going on. And so what do we do? How do we start within? And I will say, you're probably thinking, well, this is really hard. And it is. It is hard to change yourself. And sometimes it really is, you've heard some people talk about living with recovery or in recovery. And they sometimes say it's a minute by minute, choice and thought process. Like, it's not just a day to day, it's a minute by minute. What am I doing in this minute? I have to say that even I do things sometimes where I think it advanced a little fast on me there. Let's see, let me try to go back. Let's see. Yeah, it keeps going ahead. I'm trying to go back here. Okay, let's start again from here. Sorry about that. Okay, I guess I have to be patient. That's my current reframe here. Okay, so again, it sometimes is a minute by minute thing. A lot of times it's self-talk. If I find myself, for example, getting an email from a colleague, and keep in mind my position here is the department chair, and I start gritting my teeth, I have to catch myself and start thinking about what is setting me off in this moment? Why am I gritting my teeth when I'm reading this thing? And think about my own response, because it's not them that's making me mad. It's me that's making me mad, making me grit my own teeth. One thing that's really important, and I love this quote, this is by JFK, and he says, is to consider the idea of crisis. And this is, I said, we're going to get back at the idea of crisis and what crisis means. JFK famously said the Chinese have two brushstrokes to write the word crisis. One brushstroke stands for danger, the other for opportunity. In a crisis, be aware of the danger, but recognize the opportunity. And in the contextual model, family stress, and in thinking about family crisis theory, the idea is that crisis is necessary for growth and change. The system has to undergo this growth and change process in order for something else to come out of this, for something new and dynamic and functional, hopefully, to remove or to emerge. And these changes might be challenging, but we have seen some of these cracks in our broader system, and you can begin to fix them. A lot of times seeing things that are happening that may not seem quite right in your systems are the beginning of making that change, not just in yourself. It's first being aware of this and aware that you have an opportunity, but then saying, okay, here's what's wrong, and then here's how we're going to fix it. One of the issues on my campus, this may be true of yours, I'm not sure, is the issue of communication, especially top-down communication from higher ed men. And, so basically, okay, that's a problem. What are we going to do to fix it? Well, we have to start talking to each other and finding out what's going on, because a big part of it is that we don't talk across constituencies, so chairs to chairs, faculty to faculty, and so on, but it's also staff to the academic side. And we'll get some kind of new thing from the registrar's office, and it's like, oh, what is this? that we're not talking about it. So, that's something, that we can see these little cracks, at least in my university, but then start to think about how to fix it. And like I said, crisis is needed to bring about the necessary change in a system. So it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. It's a very helpful thing. And, research does indicate, for example, that reframing perspectives can help people experience major depressive disorder. And it can help you develop resiliency and adapt positively to what's going on around you. And the other thing, this is also really, really hard for us, but this is again where we start from. We're collectively experiencing, probably, as I think Deb mentioned in a slightly different way, one of the most stressful things we've experienced. Until fairly recently, my great aunt just recently passed away this past spring at the age of 105. So she was alive during the last pandemic. And she doesn't remember much about it because she was really small, but she remembered at least some of the things she'd heard, and that they were like keeping people home, and there were the same issues about masking as we have now, and so on. But again, this is very stressful to all of us because we don't know what's coming next. We don't know what's happening. And it's also very stressful on a personal level because it impacts our health. A threat to health is very frightening to humans. And we need to consider what helps us as individuals, because what helps us is different for each of us. And I want y'all to think about this. You don't have to share it or anything, because this is your own business. But think about in your own personal lives, what helps renew your own sense of spirit and your own sense of energy, because you have to find these things to renew your soul. Some of these things have changed, especially if it involves connection with others, because we don't necessarily have that. And even before people started getting vaccinated and so on, we weren't even sure if we could connect with family. Up until this summer, I had not seen my mom and my siblings for 18 months. And that was just very weird, aside from in Zoom, aside from in little boxes. I had not seen them because we all live scattered all over the country, which is also not uncommon. And the one suggestion here is to find something that is, a passion greater than yourself. It can include spirituality or religious observance. That is and we'll talk about how this helps in terms of the flight, fright, or freeze response that gets kind of stuck in a minute. It can also be, finding other things. Mine personal ones, and I'm happy to share them, are sports. I've always been an athlete. I do ice dancing, and of course that was shut down for quite a while. But I'm a runner. And I actually was forced to start running outside instead of our lovely air-conditioned indoor track here on campus because it was closed. And I actually have gotten to be a better runner. My times have gone way down, which makes me very happy. But it's because I've been forced to run outside where there's hills, where there's heat and humidity at certain times of year and things like that. So I've gotten better at that. Another thing for me, let's see, what else have I done here? Reading, watching things on streaming that are interesting, sharing about that with my friends. Becoming involved in physical activity actually has been shown to help reduce the impacts of toxic stress, as well as things like spiritual practice, including meditation. That has actually been shown in the research. Our bodies learn, which fights to pick and which to walk away from, primarily due to the reduction in the body chemicals that teach us to be in constant fight mode. And, another thing we need to think about is strengthening our own resilience, or about our own comfort with ambiguity. And we all come from different cultural and ethnic backgrounds that have more or less comfortableness, that is not a word, more or less tolerance for ambiguity. But the thing is, we're all academics. At least I gather that most of us are academics, which means what do we do when we have a question? We hopefully do what we tell our students: go to the related literature and look it up. We don't go to Wikipedia. But we're used to what my point here is, we're used to finding an answer, either looking at the related literature, the peer-reviewed literature, or going and doing a study and finding out the answer for ourselves. That's a problem, though. It may be helpful in our academic work, but the problem is what that means, we're not comfortable. There's no answer to this current situation. And so what do we have to do? We have to start again with ourselves first. We have to admit our own compassion fatigue. We have to admit we're burned out. We have to grieve what we've lost, because we've lost a lot from this. Like I said, from my own personal life, I hadn't had contact with my parents or siblings in 18 months, which was very weird, you know, and uncanny and not right in a whole lot of different levels. And admit you're worn out, and hopefully other people will hear this, and then, you know, move on. And also something else to turn it around is to think about the fact that we're still here. We're still here. And this is important. A lot of people at the beginning of the pandemic, you may have seen those things. Everybody was worried about the mental health system and how people were developing PTSD. Well, guess what? Research that was conducted around the world in over 100 countries indicates that depression and anxiety, along with our overall sense of well-being, even in relation to people who might have been struggling the most to start with, are actually showing resilience over the course of this pandemic. We're learning how to live well with ambiguity. And it's not to say that everyone is doing well with it, because they found things that you probably expect from what you've seen in the news, that people are struggling financially, and women tend to be more disadvantaged and experiencing more challenges because of the pandemic. But overall, people are doing better than you think. And that to me is good news. I felt good just hearing about that study a few days ago. So I, you know, thought I'd throw that in here as well. You know, it's important to remember that. And this is reaching out, obviously. And first is establishing boundaries. That is something this pandemic has helped me do, because I really had no disconnect between, like some of you were saying in the chat, between work and home. I was always there because I had, partly because we were remote, and also because I have my own health condition. I have asthma. I got a you know, a special permission to work from home, even when chairs and higher administrators were required to be back here. And it was hard for me to distance myself from work because I was there. My gym is in my house. My work is in my house. My house is in my house. So where, you know, where's the boundary? And I put boundaries this time. I told the students I don't respond after 5 unless it's an emergency, especially about tech issues. And I don't respond on the weekend. And I told my faculty the same thing, because they were texting me when I was running, because I use my phone as my GPS so I can track my times and things. And I was getting texts from faculty. I was like, you know, my smartwatch gives me the notification. I was like, what is that? And I'd of course stop running to look, and I'd be like, what do they want at this time? You know, and I finally had to put my foot down and say, put the boundary there. But again, I'm in a position, a relatively privileged one as an academic, because I'm not only in my chair, I'm a full professor and I have tenure. But what we need to do is help others who can't. So I speak for my faculty, especially for my contingent faculty and for my untenured faculty. And that actually helps me, because if I can speak up for them, I can make the university a better place for everyone. I finally realized that it's kind of like using universal design in your course so everybody can access it. It makes it better, not just for students with learning challenges, but it makes it better for all the students. It's the same way. If I work for, you know, the people who are at the bottom of the academic totem pole, so to speak, I can also help the whole system become better. And another thing, you know, this basically means is reaching out to others. And part of this is what I've done is I set up something at my campus called Chair Chat. And we have that after our monthly Council of Chairs meeting. This is off the record. Anything goes. And it comes from like something I did when I was in marriage and family therapy training, where we would get together as supervisees, trainees, whatever you want to call us. We get together once a month or so and talk about stuff we experienced in our supervisions that we didn't want to share with our supervisors or the therapist at the setting or whatever. It's the same idea. And we do sit there and complain, but a lot of out of this complaining comes good things, because it's like, oh, that's a problem. Well, how can we fix that within our system? And that is something else that you know is, you know, this sort of the concluding thing here before we get to the next question in the chat. You know, is basically recognizing when system change is needed and trying to work to do that, because that kind of comes out of these other things. Well, if communication is a problem on our campus, how are we going to fix that? You know, and actually, I'm in a leadership program now. We had to come up with an action plan for our campus, and the vice provost and I and one of the student success navigators are also in it. We're all in it, and we're actually coming up with a plan to enhance communication on campus. You know, because if I'm going to, you know, say this is a problem, I better come up with a solution. I mean, we're supposed to manage up, right? So that's what I'm doing. I'm managing up. And to sort of turn it around, what we're going to consider now is what has helped you foster resilience in yourselves and others since the onset of the pandemic. And this leads into what we're going to talk about next with Sharon.
So in an effort to reference what Chad started off with, to build community, to engage, to have a little bit of fun, I thank you for being here and for sitting with us for so long. And I encourage you, if you want to just get up and stretch a little bit, that's perfectly fine. Take like 10 seconds for yourself and move your body in a way that, you know, that supports you. And we're going to go on to talk a little bit about what exactly is in your toolkit. What are some of the things that you're engaging in? What are some of the resources and mechanisms, the activities that you're doing to help support yourself and help support others? So do we have anything in the chat regarding the current question?
Yeah, one just came in. I'm surviving thus far and realizing that I'm stronger than I realized and can be very resourceful when I need to be. So it's kind of what Dorothy was talking about, people kind of rising to the occasion.
Absolutely.
Any other comments on what's helped here? One person says praising others.
Yes.
Any other comments on what's helped you foster resilience in self and others since the onset of the pandemic? Here's some more comments. Engaging in gratitude activities. Keeping a gratitude journal via an app. That's interesting. And understanding that taking care of self is not selfish. And one person says taking long walks. So what Dorothy had mentioned about being physically active. Disconnecting entirely. Spent time remodeling my kitchen, something that I felt a sense of completion and success. I'm doing a lot of remodeling myself right now, so I understand that. All right, great. Well, thanks for all those comments, and we'll move into the next slides here.
Thanks, Chad. So we have, as you shared, we have several different things that we can rely on to help us navigate our space. And in higher ed, we can basically divide our space into three broad categories. We talk about systemic space, our administration, the environment that we're working in. We can talk about our intermediate space, so the space that's most proximal to us. So it could be our department, our college, things like that. And of course, we have our personal space. And these categories reflect in part the realms of ACEs in terms of household, community, and environment. And there's several different things that you could engage in, obviously, to develop agency within your space, to navigate your space well. Clearly, there's sometimes going to be limitations in how you navigate systemic issues versus intermediate and personal issues. But nonetheless, we do have a responsibility, and we do have the ability to a certain extent to support ourselves, support each other as we move through these different spaces. So for example, just to give some examples that sort of lead on from what Dorothy shared and also what Deb shared as well, systemically at my university, something that really helped me over the past couple of months is we've spent so much time and attention, obviously, on the public health crisis that we're all facing. But at the same time, we also had some social justice issues that came up, became quite obvious, quite glaring sometimes. And so at my university, for the first time, I think we've seen tangible discussions and tangible activities to suggest that there's a true intent to recognize diversity and inclusion. And that has been, I can't control the pandemic, but knowing that we're making strides in other places has been a way for me to sort of like take a breath and appreciate, okay, I can keep going, I can keep supporting others, I can keep supporting myself, and so on. Another example in my more proximal, my intermediate space, is the idea of a colleague check-in. Now, I happen to work in the Department of Counseling, School Psychology, and Family Science. So we're all, I think to a certain extent, very much in tune with humanity and the humanness of working in higher ed, unlike perhaps some other departments. But one thing that we've practiced doing now is colleague check-ins, like a 1-minute check-in at departmental meetings and so on, and not a cursory, like just asking to a genuine investment in each other. And we've gotten to a place now where we feel even more comfortable, I believe, sharing information, even those of us who may be fully tenured, as well as those who are pre-tenure and so on, contingent faculty. So you get a sense that you have a voice and it's being heard on issues that may not be directly relevant to what you're doing in the workplace, but relevant to you being successful in that workplace. And of course, personal resources, personal activities, Dorothy mentioned running, and so on. And so one thing that I engage in, the lovely term is forest bathing, or shinrin-yoku. It's a Japanese activity, but basically it just means communion with nature. As someone mentioned in the chat, just going outside and spending some time and really breathing the air and feeling the sun on your skin, or feeling the grass beneath your feet has become a pleasure. It's become a way for me to process sometimes what may be a difficult day or navigate a rather difficult space in a meaningful way. So what we'd like to do, in the absence of being able to do breakout rooms, we encourage you to, we've started a Google document, and we encourage you to share some of your resources, activities, mechanisms at the systemic, at the intermediate, and at the personal level in the chat. And also, if you're comfortable doing so, sharing it in the Google document as well. We're hoping that we can build this resource, this toolkit that we can then share with everyone, not only who attended the summit, but even beyond. So thank you for your time and your attention. And Chad, I am going to, I'm not a forest bather, but I definitely love communing with nature at the beach. Well said, Deb, well said. Okay, so Chad, it's over to you now. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So as Sharon mentioned, we do have a Google Doc. I threw it in the chat there. And the Google Doc really presents these 3 questions. So first is, what's in your toolkit? And then thinking more in detail, what do you have at the personal, intermediate, and systemic levels that might assist with reducing the impacts of trauma and stress, or reduce resiliency? And then I think importantly, or what would you like to have? Maybe there are things that you are thinking of, or that you've seen in the chat for those that chatted to everyone, or you heard us read out for the chats that came just to the host today. What maybe some of those things you thought, well, gosh, I don't have that, but I would like to have that, or I'd like to start doing that. So you can click on the link in the chat window that I just put in a moment ago, or you can just type it in. It's bit.ly/HES-toolkit. And note that link is case sensitive if you type it in on your own. Looks like we've got a handful of people joining right now and adding some ideas. So it could be things that you've already mentioned in the chat yourself. Could be things that you've heard about. One thing that we talked about before presenting today was the use of multimedia. So it could be a website that you visited that had a lot of interesting information on it that was related to building resiliency. Could be a TED Talk you've seen that you thought really struck a chord with what you've been experiencing, things like that. So we've got a lot of people typing right now, which is great. So if you're not on the document, people are saying walking or hiking, painting, reading, remodeling, yoga, swimming. One person says they rescued a puppy. One person says they rescued 2 cats, or perhaps the cats rescued them. Exercise, all great. At the intermediate level, we have the colleague check-ins, as Sharon said, as well as texting colleagues, weekly email messages. And I know in the chat, somebody mentioned scheduling online time with colleagues with no agenda, just to talk about anything, and they call them huddles. So very similar to it sounds like very similar to the chair chats that Dorothy was talking about earlier. Systemic here, looking at diversity and inclusion practices, reading, doing research, maintained work on our quality, and then various improvement projects. Someone in the personal put diamond art. Could you expand on diamond art? I'm not sure. Or maybe you could throw in the chat or in the document. Okay, they're typing.
I know what that is.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah, well, the thing is, our navigator started on it and she got us all into it. And what it is, it's a painting or maybe a photograph, and then you get these like little plastic shiny diamondy looking things, and you pick them up with a pin and put them in the picture. It's kind of like paint my numbers, but with little cubey diamondy things, for lack of a better way to put it. And they're kind of cool, you know, like
yeah, they said beading. Yeah, they described it as beading on a canvas. So
yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, interesting. And at the intermediate level, some more ideas coming in: chat, video call, check-ins with colleagues, weekly staff calls. Let's see here. Adding a question of the day to get to know colleagues better. That's an interesting idea. So any other ideas? I don't see anything in the chat or the questions, but again, if you haven't joined the document and you have an idea, feel free to join it or put it in the chat. Someone in the chat just said, thanking students and clients. Yeah, I think that's important and kind of ties into some of the gratitude related practices that have been mentioned. Let's see, someone says, working with our institution to transform to a trauma-informed organization. That's another systemic level, a big project that could help tie into promoting and sustaining resilience. All right, wonderful. Well, thanks for all those great ideas. We've got just a few minutes here. We do want to thank everybody for attending our session today. And we really hope that the information and the resources shared during this session were useful to you. And we really look forward to continuing this conversation. So we're going to keep this document active, so you can feel free to continue adding to the document. We'd like to take that information and then refine it and add some more resources and information to it, and then be able to give it to you as a resource, not just as Sharon said, not just as a summit attendee, but also things that you could take back to your institutions, your organizations, and share with them as well. So thanks again for attending, and a special thanks to Judith Santmeyer and Teresa Harris of Okra, as well as the Summit Planning Committee. So if you have any questions, we'd be happy to take those now. No questions coming in yet, but I can give the remainder of the time to Judith to kind of wrap up the first day of the summit here.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chad. I appreciate you, Dorothy, Deborah, and Sharon presenting this very helpful. It provides some practical tools that we need to keep in the forefront as we continue through this pandemic and get to build our toolkit. So I think that's very helpful for today. So everyone, we have reached the end of our session today. Just wanted to take a moment, just as Dr. Moore suggested, that we take just a moment to reflect. And so go ahead and put in the chat, is there a key takeaway or something that maybe you learned new today, or something that brought you back to center as far as the topics that we may have covered? I know we covered a lot. We went a lot of first responders must respond to self first. Sort out from the outside in, or inside out. Sorry, they meant the inside out. Resilience is my word of the day. Yes. Love Dr. Moore's superhero analogy, right? So we can all be thinking about, you know, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman and how that helps us. Be sure to take care of yourself in order to be successful in helping others. Carving out time today to focus and be with colleagues. Take time for yourself so you can care for others. Many people are working to make things tolerable and manageable. We're certainly not alone in this. Absolutely. So on that note, we will go ahead and conclude for today.